master at teaching people how to tell their stories, I'm going to tell you a story. Now, this is the version that I remember. This is not the version that John remembers, but it's my story. The story is that I had an idea to write a research paper about the Free Southern Theater and the work that they did with the Civil Rights Movement, because I was interested in how do the arts and how do theater work alongside with and strengthen social movements. And as the wonderful Professors Kwan and Griffith mentioned on Friday when they premiered, the Arizona premiered the film Mountains That Take Wing about Angela Davis and Karen Kochiyama. Is that correct? Yuri Kochiyama. I threw in an extra K. Yuri Kochiyama, that we think of the arts as a side note, right, to these social movements. But that in fact, they're an integral part of the movement. And I think that John can speak very well to that. So I was writing this paper, and I contacted him, and I said, I would love to interview you about your work with the Free Southern Theater. And he said, great, I will call you at 7 a.m. And I said, 7 a.m. New Orleans time? Because that will be 5 a.m. Arizona time. And I think he said, he doesn't remember this, I think he said, well, be sure to make a strong pot of coffee. But when you have the opportunity to speak to someone like John O'Neill, if they say get up at 5 a.m., you get up at 5 a.m. I would get up at 3 a.m. So I set my alarm for 4:55 a.m. I opened my eyes, I cleared my throat, I said an om, I took a breath, and I dialed up John. And he said, good morning, Catherine. And thus we began a conversation. And as he was speaking to me, the sun literally was coming up, and the sunlight was coming into my room and warming up the room. And I wanted to use that as a metaphor for the experience of speaking and listening to John. Because he really takes what I would call the dark corners of pessimism, practicality. Can I come up with another P word? Help me out. Pessimism, practicality.
Pathologizing.
Yes, pathology, right? And sheds a beautiful, warming, glorious sunlight on those dark shadows. And speaking with him from that conversation on and onwards throughout the last couple of years has really reminded me and taught me to not go to those places. And remember that the arts, theater, storytelling, hip-hop, music, whatever it is, have the incredible capability of supporting social movements, creating social change, and as John noted on Friday, to teach us to love ourselves. Because as he said, you can't create change in the world until you can really know how to love yourself. Because the greatest form of oppression is that we place on ourselves. So, without further ado, I share with you a great ball of sunshine, John O'Neill.
Just because my hair is curly. What's left of it?
Some of you don't remember that song.
I had a wonderful plan, and it's not going to work. So I'm going to do something else. I'm a veteran of, you need the microphone to do what you're doing? Okay. I'd like to be close. And the civil rights movement that I was a part of was the singing movement. So y'all are gonna have to learn singing. Hold my hand. while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race, 'cause I don't want to run this race in vain. One more time now. Hold my hand, well, while I run this race. Oh, hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand, well, while I run this race, 'cause I don't want to run this race in vain. I went to work in SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Those of you who were at the film the other night will remember SNCC. Those of you who've taken a deeper bite into the apple of the effort to make change in the world may know SNCC from other ways and places and purposes. I'm sorry?
So Abby Hoffman got to start there.
Yeah. There were lots of factions inside of SNCC. And Abby was a dominant player in one of them. I was working in Southwest Georgia. When I learned this song. It was about 3 days after Jimmy Travis got shot. Driving from a voter registration meeting in over near Greenville, coming back to Greenwood, Mississippi, about a 60-mile trip, which was the state headquarters of the Delta Project, Mississippi Delta Project. And while he was going, he was driving Bob Moses, who was the director of the Mississippi Project. While they were going, night riders came up alongside of them and emptied one of those automatic weapons in the car. Several bullets hit the car, but only 2 of them hit Jimmy. One down in here somewhere, around the shoulder, and another right here. Luckily, no vital organs were damaged. Bob was able to grab the wheel, bring the car to a stop, and drag Jimmy over to the passenger side, and then drive on into, I believe they went to Mound Bayou. I'm not sure of that, but I think they were near to Mound Bayou, one of the little all-black towns in the Delta, and they had a hospital there. So he took Jimmy to the hospital, and Jimmy survived. He died about 4 months ago now, and that was 1963. Charles Sherrod, who was the director of the Southwest Georgia Project, which was a part of the Black Belt strategy of SNCC. We were going to organize a whole black belt, starting in Washington, D.C., and swinging along that fertile belt that runs from D.C. back up to Arkansas, just south of the Ozarks, where the majority of it's the place that people are talking about when they say down home, brother. When we say down home, we mean the place where the black people in this country became a people, were forged into a new people, taken from different places across West Africa and other places, and we were forged into a new people. That's the black belt. So our strategy was to attack that whole black belt in pieces, and so Southwest Georgia Project was one piece of the black belt, and Mississippi was another major piece of the black belt strategy. Bob was running that. Okay, so Jimmy got to the hospital, he survived, he died just recently, and Sherrod had this theory that the only way the nonviolent soldiers could deal with the circumstances of living and working in the South with a militant, radical perspective was that when people, if any of our soldiers got killed, it was our job, the ones who survived, to stop whatever we were doing, wherever we were doing it, and go to the place where that person or those persons were killed, and stop business as usual from rolling on. Now, as I said a moment ago, there are a lot of factions in this thing. Sherrod was in a faction all by himself on this theory. And so, but still, because he believed so firmly in what he was doing and what he thought was good, he said, well, pick 3 of us to drive over to the Delta to find out what had been going, if they wanted us to close down the Southwest Georgia Project, where we had about 40, 45 people that worked in about 7 or 8 counties. He was willing to, he actually wanted to shut this action down and take everybody over to Mississippi. Well, one of the big things about Mississippi, the Mississippi snake, was that they didn't want no white people working in there because of a whole bunch of complicated reasons. They always wanted to be in charge. They thought they knew everything. A whole bunch of stuff. Not to mention that many of the people, particularly those working in Mississippi at the time, thought of themselves as black nationalists, radical black nationalists. And so they thought they would just go ahead and do it that way, and just keep the white folk out. And about half of our staff in Georgia, Southwest Georgia, was white. And when we had 3 little representatives of the Southwest Georgia Project, all of them were black, coming up saying, well, do you want us to close down our project and come over here? All in one voice. They all said, no, y'all don't. Y'all go ahead, don't close it down. But you, O'Neill, we want you to come over here, because I was supposed to be a writer, you know, and they were shorter writers, and so they kept me. But the night before we were to drive out, going to Mississippi, we were meeting in Terrell County. Terrell, they call it. And the only place we could have our meetings was in a tent that replaced the only church that would let civil rights people have activities in Terrell that had been burned down. And in the tent, it was a spring night, like March even, I think, but it was cold, you know, unusually cold. And so they had a gasoline heater sitting in the middle of the tent, that kind that looks like a number 10 tub on the bottom, and a flue running up the middle, comes about this high. And when you light it, it sounds like you just started a jet engine. And I thought the damn thing was gonna blow up. So I gave it room and tried to stay close to where the flap on the tent was, just in case somebody had to go for help. That was my rationale. I was gonna be the one to get there and say, we need your help. And so, near the end of the meeting, Sherrod, who, as I told you, was a preacher himself, asked this deacon of that particular church he had told him about the three of us going over to Mississippi to survey the land, find out if the rest of us should go. And so when the old deacon got up, he prayed to God awful long time. But when he got done praying, he started singing this song. And then we sang the song all the way to Stockville, Mississippi the next day, where we stopped the car. And I swear to you, Mississippi, it was my first time to stay in Mississippi. The dirt was black, unlike the red clay we had in Georgia and in that section of Alabama, which gave a beautiful contrast to the very rich green foliage, even this time of year. But the dirt we came into when we hit the Mississippi state line, it seemed like, I'm sure it probably wasn't. You know how you see things when you're scared? And we were scared, don't make a mistake about it. And the trees all looked like they were dancers trying to be trees. It's like they wanted to grab a hold of us and whoop us for getting out of our place. We stopped, gassed up, and we stopped singing. And made our way to Greenwood. And I stayed there, and a few days later, John Churchville in Philadelphia. And Don's last name just went that way. He married Kenneth Clark's daughter, Don did. So you academics might know Mr. Clark. Kenneth Clark, not John Clark. Yeah. He was a visionary that gave us RU Act. They went on back to Southwest Georgia, and I stayed in Mississippi, and that's where I learned that song. Oh, hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race, 'cause I don't want to run this race in vain. Now me, I prefer story and storytelling to argument in this litigious society that we have grown up in, most of us. You know, you can get sued for your nose gets drippy and you can get sued for anything. And the lawyers, I suspect there's more than one in here, but you know it's true. Lawyers will argue. My mother used to tell me, she said, John, you will argue with a signpost. So at that point, I wasn't quite as interested in stories as I am now.
Lawyers get paid by the hour.
Huh?
Lawyers get paid by the hour.
Oh, yeah, by the hour, yeah. Ain't that something? And we get taught when we go to colleges and things like that, we get taught to argue. Now, the problem with argument is not that we can do without argument. I'm not advocating that we do away with argument. That's not my point. But at the end of an argument, you get winners and losers. The premise of this kind of argument is that if you argue real hard and get the thorough argument among peers, that you will work your way toward the truth. I don't think that's true. I really don't think that's true. Some years ago, I was making a piece about the relationships between blacks and Jews. It's a two-person piece. Naomi Newman of the Traveling Jewish Theater from San Francisco and myself, and we make this piece. Well, one of the stories in the piece was about my father, who was, I grew up in a little small town in southern Illinois, right on the Ohio River, right near Cairo. And my father was both Alexander County, which Cairo was the county seat of, and Pulaski County, where I grew up, were 50% black population. The rest of the state, up as far as Carbondale, where Southern Illinois University is, and Williamson County, where the coal mining industry was seated in Illinois, such as it was, and it was about 12%. Those two guys were about 12% black, about 60 miles away from Sydney, Cairo. And then you didn't get any more black people till you got up to East St. Louis, on there on the Mississippi River, and didn't get any more. There was a few dusting all the way through, it was a nice image. All the way across the central part of the state, but you got no significant percentages of black population. You got Chicago. East St. was about 80% black at the time. Chicago was more in the 50, 60 range until you got to the suburbs around Chicago. And so that was going to be my I was telling you about my dad. That wasn't going to be nothing. I was going off a wrong trail. You do that when you tell stories. You wake up and find yourself, oh, how did I get here? But no, I'm on my way to, I'm still in elementary school at the time the story gets told. And Dad, my grandfather, who lived next door, was a preacher. Reverend O'Neill never got him a church because he didn't know a big part of the preacher's job is to entertain. He thought his job was to raise these serious moral questions and counsel people to attend to them with care and energy. He was a Baptist preacher. The congregations in Baptist churches hired a preacher. And they only called Reverend O'Neill when nobody else could come. Because they were, well, you wouldn't understand. And so, but Dad was more interested in oratory. He even considered himself an agnostic. And so would write out his speeches and deliver them in an oratorical fashion. I remember while there one time, I don't mean to turn my back on him. one time, Dad was speaking in Negro History Week. I've told this story once before since I've been here, so forgive me for those of you who've heard it already. But Negro History Week it was then, not month as it is now, but it was Negro History Week. And I remember when it was Negro History Day. You know? But Dad wrote the speech, and the NAACP had him put him on the radio to celebrate Negro History Week. And at one point in the speech, he said, to quote the great Thomas Jefferson, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Paul. He said, "But the great Virginian held slaves." I can remember the chill that went through I feel it now. I was so proud of my daddy, you know, so proud. But shortly after that speech that night, and in my memory, it had to do something with what my daddy said to people on the radio. The president of the NAACP, Dr. Fingal, who was from the islands somewhere, Dr. Fingal had a cross burned in his yard. And shortly thereafter, moved to Chicago. We thought, no, the kids, we thought that it had something to do with that speech. My dad read it on the radio. So to get the story right for the show that we were working on, knowing that memory sometimes plays tricks on you, I decided on a trip home to ask Mom and Dad if I was remembering the story right. I told them where my music. And they looked at each other and said, Mother said, I don't think Daddy ever said anything like that. And I looked at Dad and he said, no, I don't remember that. And I'm thinking, this is as clear as day to me. Just as clear as it could be. And Mother, to support her argument, went and got all she had saved as papers. And she read through them and she said, I don't see anything. I said, anything about Thomas Jefferson. That's the way memory works. But that does not mean that it's not a true story. And a good story. Because even if he didn't say it that time, the way I remembered it, it is essentially true to what a group of people like my daddy and his father would have said if they had the opportunity. And a whole bunch of people like me remember what they would have said if it had only occurred to them. Whether they said it or not, or whether they thought that it was too dangerous for us to go around talking like that, and therefore we'll just forget it. Whatever, you know. That's the way stories work, though. Read the stories about Abe Lincoln. That was a laugh line there. I guess it didn't sound funny to most of y'all. As I say, I prefer stories. And oh, that's not the right one. And conversation. I really do like conversation. I like to hear people tell stories. I like to see what is going on. So I'm gonna read from. I'm trying to develop this this essay, which uses story instead of. Yeah, I was just reading what this damn thing was saying. You tell me I can't find what I'm looking for. And so, before we leave here, I'm going to just, if I can find it, I'm just going to read 2 or 3 sections of this essay that I'm working on. It's for a book. Oh, you forgot to say.
I know.
It's for a book that is coming out soon. It's a bunch of artists who work in different media, who are working together with an extraordinary young woman who is both a scholar and a teacher and a great writer named Cynthia Coyne, who's working at Brandeis University right now on the area of art and social change. That's her series of focus. She's assembled a bunch of people from around the world that I'm very proud to be a part of to participate in this book. Wait a minute. And it's called what did I think it was?
The world stage?
Acting together on the world stage. Yes, that's it. There's a colon, but I don't know what comes after it.
Okay.
Can't remember that.
There's always a colon.
Acting together on the world stage. A bunch of people, and there's about 24 people writing for this book. And they tell me mine is going to be the last essay in the book. I don't know if that's good or bad now. And I want to read something from this. Oh, come on. Huh? Yeah, would you find it? I don't know how to use my own machine. Thank you very much.
What is it? What is it?
Oh, it's called Do You Smell Something Stinky? And I want to get the one that says number 8.
I didn't just say shit out of nowhere. It's part of the essay's title.
Yeah, the subtitle
So what do
on
you
that
say?
is,
After the tone.
yeah, the subtitle, Do You Smell Something Stinky? You can't,
Oh, the cesspool.
oh yeah, if you're born in a cesspool, you're bound to grow up smelling shit. Yeah, that's, now, you young people don't think that that's a bad word. You know, it's a major part of the English language. 8 is the one I want. It says version 8. That one will do. What is that? It's 8 is the last right here. It This is revised RV8. Now I'm thinking of a transition to cover this search. You know how to do that kind of stuff? Yeah, that's the way to do it. Yeah, that's the way to do it. She's talking. She's an Apple lady. I don't know. It looks like she got lost. But she was.
She found it. She knows how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my wife she's talking about.
Run Word and open Reason.
Huh?
If you run Word and then just open the file to Reason.
I just did that, and I think I put something in its place because I saved it to my flash drive, which is up in.
Do you want me to go get your
Would
flash
you?
drive?
It's in your computer.
Okay, I'll go
Yeah,
get it.
yeah. So y'all can stop.
We found version 7, I just can't find version 8.
Okay.
Unless you type us in.
Yeah. No, it'll be all right. Because Beth will be. Thank you. Beth will be right back. And I ran up there just before we started looking for it, but the door was locked. Somebody stole the computer. But at any rate, I'll tell you while that's happening how I decided while I was in college, just before I came south to work in the movement, that I was going to be a playwright. And I made a 25-year plan to become a playwright. My reasoning went that I saw this article, an interview with Richard Burton, who was thought to be a very good actor until his third marriage to Elizabeth Taylor. Then they began to worry something wrong. But I don't know, it may have been, I forget that. But he had written this, done this interview in which one of the things he said was that it takes at least 20 years to become a decent actor. And I've been in college and had been trying to act and doing stuff at SIU. And it sounded reasonable to me to say it took 20 years. Because I knew how I struggled to get something that sounded like it was halfway right. And so I said, if it takes 20 years to become a decent actor, it should take at least 25 years to become a playwright. Because the playwright has to comprehend what the actor's work is, what the scenographer's work is, what the oh, you didn't find it?
And she's a Mac user.
Oh,
So I'm
okay.
tag teaming this. Not your.
Something stinky. Yeah. Yeah, version 9. Version 9 is on that. Yeah.
Version 8 or version 9?
9. I was going back to 8 on the one that was saved because it wouldn't have been, yeah. So I made my plan, and before I could get to New York, where I was going to learn about writing, the movement started. And, you know, first came the sit-ins, and then came the Freedom Ride in 1961. And at that point, I graduated in 62. I'm thinking, what's happening in the South is the most important thing that's happening in the world. And I also was thinking on another track that the only, it's there?
It's there. Version
Oh,
9's up.
great. The other thing I was thinking was that, thank you both very much, was that the only thing that could be fairly called evil in the world is if you believe one thing and then set out to do something else. You can't blame anybody for acting on what they, you can't call it evil anyway. You may oppose it and wish to overcome it, but you can't say it's evil unless their values and their actions don't correspond. That was my philosophy, my contribution to philosophy. I don't know anybody else that says that.
John Paul Sartre calls that bad faith.
Bad faith. All right.
I think.
All right. I'll check on Jean Paul.
Okay.
Raise the podium.
Did that help?
Yeah. Then I can look up and read too. But then I was going to New York, and there I'm saying, so my actions and my beliefs were out of correspondence with each other. Was I going to be evil? So I went on to work in the South. Spend 4 or 5 years, get everything straightened out, and then go to New York.
And where are you now, John? I said, where are you now?
New Orleans. Well, I was a little naive. John Kennedy got elected to the presidential White House in 1960, as I recall. And he was seen, he and his family were seen as the liberal princes of the nation. And I come to find out that they were major financial investors in several of the corporations upon which the economy of the South was based. I come to find out that Columbia University, which was next to Harvard in some people's minds as a liberal to-do, Columbia University was the biggest slumlord in Harlem. Still is. Still is. Leading all the gentrification that's going on that destroys communities and displaces people willy-nilly without consideration of the interests and needs of the communities being destroyed. Now you can't stop progress, but damn. I'm thinking, what's wrong with these people? And soon it became clear that the colon, I forgot to say that. Notes from conversations about making art while working for justice in racist imperial America in the 21st century. Power concedes nothing without demand. It never has and it never will. That was Fred Douglass. And the line about the cesspool. There's Burke. I'm talking to these people now, babe. I'm in the education where can you talk to here?
Yeah.
Yeah, Julia.
Farmer.
We were supposed to meet here at 3.
The farmer agent.
The line about the cesspool is attributed to sayings from the life and writings of Junebug Jones. Junebug was the character that moment of things. A major concern, it seems to me, one section I wish to read, and then I'd like to stop and have more conversation. Elephants. This is section 3 that I'm going to share with you. How can we make it better? Until he died in 1996, C. Bernard Jackson was the founder and director of the Inner City Cultural Center in Los Angeles. I heard Jack say at a conference that he was profoundly disappointed with the trend toward the sanctification of the scientific process. You were very close. She hates it when I do that. So I ain't gonna do it no more. Jack said, oh shoot. Y'all gonna think I don't know nothing about this machine. How can we make it better? There you are. I heard Jack say at a conference that he was profoundly disappointed with the trend toward the sanctification of the scientific process. We're learning, quotes, we're learning more and more about less and less. Forget such analysis, he said. The normally quiet man almost screamed and said, what we need is to better understand how things fit together. In making art, I believe the central question to be, how can we make it better? The more important that it is that one addresses with his or her work, the more valuable the work has the potential to become. If the question under consideration in a given work of art is of little or no consequence, why bother? The effort required is too great. The price to be paid is too dear. I thought of that last night when we were looking at the film and your comments about it. How hard it's been to work on that film for 12 years. So why not go for the best shot you can make? How can we make the conditions of life in the communities we live in better? This question is always a political question. Considering that the term politics refers to the ways people make and carry out decisions about their common welfare. The relationship between theater and the struggle for racial justice, between art and the struggle for racial justice, has provided the context for my life and work since 1963. It was early spring. Plans for Freedom Summer were well underway. Doris Derby and I were staffers of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and Gil Moses, a student at Oberlin College in Ohio. Representing a student collective there, he had come to Jackson to serve as editor of the Mississippi Free Press. Doris and I were working on the adult literacy training project at Tougaloo College. In the evenings, I had the assignment to translate Charlie Cobb's idea for freedom schools, free schools that would foster civic participation and empowerment among school-age Black youth, into a doable plan. Like most movement staffers, I was soon to take on yet another task, that being to help make a free Southern theater. It was late one night in the small, cluttered, smoke-filled apartment that Gil and I shared in Jackson. We had talked way past midnight, and the smell of the meal we'd shared had long since turned stale. But oh, so passionately did we still carry on about art and the theater we thought ought to be the theater we wanted to work in. It was long after 2 a.m. when the heady conversation came to a pause. Simply and profoundly, Doris broke the heavy silence. Well, if theater means anything anywhere, it certainly ought to mean something here. Why don't we make a theater? The three of us passed a silent, open-mouthed gaze around the room. I don't know how long we sat like that before it was settled. In that quiet moment, the Free Southern Theater was born. It was an optimistic period. We were buoyed by the dynamic civil rights movement that had been born in the mid-50s after the Supreme Court decision in Brown versus the Board of Education, which called for the desegregation of schools. I have an uncle who is retired now, but was a principal for Black schools in West Tennessee. I was talking to him about desegregation of schools, and this was about 12 years ago. He said, he's a quiet man, he said, well, I'd have to say, all in all, that we've lost more than we've gained from that decision. But you can't ignore history. So I guess we just have to plow on till we gain a victory of greater measure. And I think you would start thinking about how it is true now that there are more people going to segregated schools now than there were then. There are more people, Black administrators, locked out of the administrative functions and roles of, we're in the education school here. Yeah.
Yes.
Y'all think about it. More Black principals and so forth. Lost jobs and continue to be without jobs of that standing than now than there were then. And let us not begin a conversation about KIP and charters. Taking public money to satisfy private agenda. And we got little no people organizing and working to fight against these developments, you know, effectively. But we can do it But, I mean, you know, I just have to say this about our president. His Secretary of Education, as I understand, gained fame and a certain measure of fortune for being director of KIPP schools all over Chicago.
That's right.
How is he going to figure out how to solve the problems that we now face? Because he got the wrong agenda.
That's right.
And I'm told also he never spent much time himself in anybody's classroom as a teacher. You know, something wrong with the calculus going on. But, and it's up to us to fix it. You know, they'll do the best they can. I mean, Obama's a good man. But apparently he didn't study very much about education either. He knows constitutional law, though.
Yeah.
Know that good. I'm going to jump down here to the next big question for me, which is race and racism. Slave ain't supposed to die a natural death. The birth of Junebug Productions and racism. There's some controversy about the date of the death of the movement of which the FST was a part. But there is absolutely no controversy about the death of the FST. The FST, Free Southern Theater, died of natural causes in October of 1980 and was immediately succeeded by Junebug Productions, which took up a complementary mission. Since then, Junebug Productions has been a professional touring theater company and arts organization based in New Orleans. Its mission has been to create, produce, and present high-quality theater, dance, and music that inspire and support people who work for justice in the African-American community and in the world at large. While FST did excellent work in its time, I felt that we reached an artistic plateau in 1979. In 1980, I was 40 years old and I was worried that I'd have to spend another 15 to 20 years without the chance to do the work that I felt I was called to do. Other colleagues solved this problem by moving on to New York or Hollywood. I didn't want to do that. I was committed to working for a base in the South, the historic home of African Americans. It seemed to me that to do otherwise would be to perjure my mission. I knew that in order to survive long term, we'd have to produce enough revenue to pay people. I set out to create work with revenue producing potential. In New Orleans, audiences could pay, at that time, my eyes did that. In New Orleans, I knew that audiences that could pay would mostly be from the colleges and universities. And I knew that they would only buy tickets to see work of predictable quality. I set out to match or exceed their expectations of the market that was available to us. Part of my work at Junebug, okay, I'm going to save the last 23 minutes for a conversation. Okay, that means I got to finish this in 2. So let me go right to this thing about race. I tell the story of, and I can tell it shorter than I can. I tell the story of a good friend of mine. In fact, I would call him my best friend, at least one of my best friends. A guy named Dudley Cobb. He's the director of a group from Appalachia called the Roadside Theater. Roadside Theater. And the question that I'm trying to highlight and focus here is how do we work against racism among friends? You know, because of this earlier thesis that I suggest with the cess food analogy. Just because we would like not to be racist, and I'm applying that to both black people and white people, because in order for racism to prevail, or any oppressive construct to prevail in any society, the oppressed people must internalize the values of oppression and exploitation, and therefore weaken their capacity to resist. And so, one day we were working on a new play, The Roadside, and we got to talking. In fact, this was before I want to tell about the period that happened before we started actually working together. I had just seen my first roadside performance. It's called Red Fox's Second Hanging. It's about the impact of industrialization of the coal fields in central Appalachia on the life and culture there. And I knew from previous experience that the Klan, a major branch of the Ku Klux Klan, was founded in East Tennessee and spread out all over a good portion of the country. And it's all right. It's all right, baby. I'm going to be through in a minute. And so Dudley and the Roadside Gang was at this festival, and they were the only ones in the camp. We were in the camp in Florida. They were the only ones there who had beer. Made it a tempting place to visit, and I wanted to know more about these people too. So I wandered over to the camp. Dudley saw me, came in, brought me a beer right away. And he says to me, well, as soon as the pleasantries were done, what did you think about our work? And I looked at him. I didn't know Dudley could only see well from one eye. So it gave him a funny gaze, you know. He locked me in the gaze of that one eye and said, so what did you think about our work? And I said, well, if what you say about your work is true, that you work for the people of Central Appalachia, and if I know from my own experience that there are a lot of potential Klansmen in your audience. Frankly, Dudley, I didn't see anything in that piece that would make a potential Klansman in the audience less likely to be a Klansman after he saw the play than he would have been before. Dudley said, well, what do you think we ought to do about that? Well, I wasn't planning to do nothing. You know, I just wanted to back him up, you know. Because most of the time you say stuff like that, at that point anyway, you say, the guy shaking his head like it's true now. And you say something like that to white folks, they go, and get out of your way. But Douglas said, so what are we gonna do about it? And I knew he meant him and me. I said, well, it started an argument between us that has been going on now for almost 30 years. And a deep, deep friendship. If you want to know more about the kinds of things that as they said, you know, wait till the book gets home. And I would really like to hear what kind of things y'all would like to talk about. So, come. Yes, sir.
I had a preconceived notion when I came in that the gist of the thing would be, and as you stated, that we tend to, those of us, we're all here trying to save the world, I assume. And if we don't think that's why we're here, then maybe we can think again, because that is why we're here. We're trying to save the world. And we spend a lot of time arguing with folks, trying to get them to see things our way, because of course we know what's up. And if they just listen to our point of view, everything would be fine. But arguing doesn't seem to get us there. But telling stories, putting things in a personal light that people can identify with, and put themselves in the place of another person, maybe that's more effective way to go, to be a great communicator. Let's see, maybe to be a transformational kind of president, someone who can change people's view of the world. So that's, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a nice summary of what my intentions were. Yes, in fact.
I'd like to tell you that we're traveling across the country to in a caravan. We're going to be going through New Orleans in about 2 weeks. We're going to bring the story about racism and anti-immigrant sentiment here in Phoenix. We will be in New Orleans, so I invite you to come and join us and meet with us. If I can, I'll give you a card to meet with us. You're in the town, but we are going to Washington, D.C., and we'll have about 15 people, but we'll be talking to cities all along the way to try and bring awareness about our struggles here in Phoenix.
I would say it feels to me, I'm very proud to be here at this occasion, at this school in Phoenix. And it does feel very much like a homecoming for me because I guess I've played here about 15 to 20 times over the years in different shows and different contexts. So, and I don't know anybody else who's doing this kind of work with this kind of impact in the schools that I've seen. So I think it's in a way it's almost shocking that it should happen in Arizona, but maybe there's something to that old saying that some people cite, saying oppression naturally breeds resistance. And so if y'all keep on keeping on, maybe Phoenix will turn into bright and modern stuff.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for your story. I wonder if you would indulge us further with more of your stories. You told us some very fabulous story about the civil rights movement. What story would you tell, say 10 years from now, about today's time?
I don't know, of course, but what stands out in my mind is the threat of, I guess what I would say, I think we're living now at an age of challenge to the Western empire, Western cultural domination of the world. I think it would be a bad thing if that continues to be a successful pattern of what I think too many people who are indeed oppressed and exploited by this vast empire can't wait to get here because it's the magic place to be. So it will be the time, I guess I would say, that either we will celebrate the rise of more people who take up the challenge to that empire from within the empire, or the time when more people were condemned to death by a failure to raise that challenge. I don't have any doubt that in the long run that we will overcome on that point. The question in my mind is when, and that's a function of how hard we work and how hard we study. So I think we got to build at the grassroots level strong spirit of unity and cooperation. You guys who put this thing together, the students who take the lead in this, if y'all continue with this spirit in the places that you go to when your time is done at this institution, you can magnify our numbers. Those people, I mean, and that's true for all of us. What we try to do is build collaborations with other people who have similar ideas to what we're trying to work on. And we really need some good filmmakers to come help us think about this stuff. Yeah. Because y'all can communicate with people. Theater, you know, we have to be there to do it. You can finish a piece and it can continue to work for years and years and years. Yes, ma'am. Sir, I'm sorry.
When you're telling stories, how do you decide where to begin?
How to begin? What's on my mind and my heart? You know? What? And we just had a great story circle upstairs, across the hall, the road. And what I asked the people in this circle to do was tell the story that comes from the deepest place. And don't think about what you're going to say until it's time to start talking. And then tell some extraordinary good stories. I think more important than the stories we tell is the stories we hear. It being understood that what we hear is in our own ears and nowhere else. You know, that y'all start talking about the stories I've told today, I bet you'll find that 2 or 3 people, if you get 2 or 3 people together, there'll be 18 or 20 different interpretations of what you say. You know, which is the premise of the interaction between the audience and the artist. The artist's job is to listen and then to share, and then listen again. Keep that dialectical relationship going. That's what I think. Story gets a story. How much time do we want to take? Somebody?
We've got time. We started late, so.
Oh, okay. Now let's say 10 minutes? Yes, sir.
Brought to mind, talking about the South, something happened to me when I was a kid. I grew up in the Washington D.C. area of Maryland. It was, very much mixed area. I didn't know much about the South. One time we took a drive down and made this mistake that I didn't know about. And I drank from the wrong water fountain. And I learned a lot from that. I never could figure it out and still can't. And I guess things aren't that way now, but
Oh, yes, they are.
I don't know.
Well, they don't have the water fountains with labels on them,
Yeah.
but the people who aren't supposed to drink from them have difficulty getting to where they are. More economic division. And those divisions are as sharp in places not southern as they are in the South, in my experience.
That's a good story, or you want to write it?
Yes, ma'am. Oh, sir.
I was wondering if you would talk a little bit more about KIPP schools and why you're opposed to them.
There are people here who know more about it than I do. Will one of you please advance to step up to that question?
What kind of school?
KIPP schools.
How do you spell that?
KIP. It's a acronym, I think. Somebody can explain what a KIPP school is?
I mean, I'm aware what they are. It seemed like you were opposed to them. I was curious as to why that was.
I suspect there's people better addressing that too. My personal opinion is that it purges the process of education if you make it a profit-making business. You substitute the drive for profit you place it over the mission to provide viable education. Now, that's not to say that every KIPP school is worse by far than every school that's not. I don't mean that. But just because you can't prove it's not all that bad, and that there are some that actually seem to have some virtues, it doesn't mean that the idea is a good one. I'm an advocate of free public education and think that our society, thank you, and think that our society is compelled to do the best it can. Of course, a lot of people may not know that free public education is also a product of the black struggle. Education in this country started out as a privilege for the wealthy people, but after the Civil War, there were too many free black people then to be permitted to it wouldn't be useful if they couldn't at least breathe, to the new economic situation. But does anybody know more about, has studied and paid attention to this KIPP concern? Anybody? Yes.
I mean, I'm a professor of education. I haven't studied the KIPP schools per se, but I'm so with you, John, on that the privatization of education and there's kind of a long march that's pushing back to public education, and many of us in the field, I think, feel that if anything still has some hope for democracy and, reaching young people. And of course, we are very concerned about the direction of education in general that doesn't have a place for the arts, that doesn't have a place for music, that doesn't have enough place for storytelling. And there were, of course, people here representing unschooling. So I'm not saying this as a champion that public schools are for everybody. They were for my child, and I believe in them. But I think it's just that when it becomes a profit-making, another, capitalist experience that takes, public resources and rechannels them to private corporations, is just another, if you will, brick in the wall of corporate globalization playing itself out on the U.S. soil. I mean, that's just what I'd say off the top of my head about it.
Very well said.
Thank you. Not that I have any feelings about it.
What's the acronym stand for? The acronym, is there an acronym for that? Is that
What is it? What is KIP stand
It's
for?
the Knowledge is Power program.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power.
And that's
You
what they're selling?
look like you might teach it in KIP school.
I don't, but a close friend of mine ran a KIP school in
Oh,
Gary,
yeah.
Indiana. And my understanding is that it's connected to the Teach for America program, which is run by the government through AmeriCorps. So I'm not sure that it's,
Actually, they're not. They're a voucher for private school, and it's a corporation. And they typically go into certain neighborhood where the schools are quote-unquote substandard. And they they're very predatory, actually. And Aaron Darlington, I used to live in Chicago, we used to organize protests against him. He was a huge champion of voucher reform.
Wasn't there a major privatization of schools in New Orleans after Katrina?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. We got, the KIP schools will be the biggest educators if things go on as they're trending in New Orleans within the next 2 or 3 years. They're starting phasing them out, phasing public schools out, and grade by grade, And so it's very sad. We still do have about 4, rather than 16, 20, remember the number, about 4 public schools that are doing pretty good at the high school level. The KIP schools and the charter schools at this point, and there's 3 school boards now. Regular school board, the KIP board, and the charter school board. And they all fight with each other in the farm. Yeah, they fight over the money, and they fight over turf, and and the interest and the idea of high stakes testing is dominant in all of them, even the public schools. There's one idea that if you can measure the children's accomplishments, you can get more money. It's rough. Yes?
A quick follow-up. But I wonder if you personally heard the recent Arnie Duncan quote about New Orleans?
The guy who said
Yeah.
the hurricane.
Perhaps Katrina was the best thing that ever happened
Yeah.
to education in the city of New Orleans.
Yeah.
We should protest that big time.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Your hobby is basketball.
Anyway.
Yeah. Education is a really big and important subject in every community. You can get people out, at least to have the first conversation. It's hard to keep them out and keep them coming to. What I noticed is that education was the same thing in our movement. I was talking about the freedom schools a minute ago. But what kind of happened to those of us who took education for our own children as the center of our concern. When our kids pass into higher education and we fall out, because it's hard work, just hard work, no matter how devoted you are.
Yeah, here they don't seem to understand that education is an investment and not an expense. Right? They keep trying to cut education and libraries, you know, useful things that are gonna, you know, they just shouldn't cut those things. They just want to increase the police. You know.
Good way to put it. Yeah.
I have a question about your theater. During the time that you did theater, did you ever get in trouble because of the content of it with opposing people who oppose your beliefs or with the law?
We get in more trouble because we screw up. You know, that's where our trouble comes from. We don't do the work. We don't make our statement. I think most people who would, you might think, would oppose our work, don't think that our work has that much impact. I'm not talking about us in particular. I'm thinking of artists as a category, because we get caught up in little internecine fights about stuff that really doesn't make any difference. And when you analyze it, it boils down to who's going to get the big time bucks. You know, and as long as we work with the same mission and the same purpose as the commercial television or commercial film, we're going to get the same result. The only variation will be how much money goes into the work. You know, that's my opinion.
Well, what if you don't have any money, but you want to change something political? But if you speak out about it, it endangers yourself and the people who care about that issue. So how can you make that message as clear as possible with an impact that will create change, but also keeping some sort of safety with the people that are creating that work or that art?
Well, I think, I'm sort of a maverick on this. Forgive me for what you say, I favor. I'm sort of a maverick on that. I think that that art tends not to radicalize people. Our job as artists is support people who are doing political education and studying. And our job is support people who are building movements. People don't run out of the theater to join the brigade. You know, somebody has to do that work. Now, and also if we just limit ourselves to the creation of propaganda, not that there's anything wrong with propaganda, it's an essential part of a political process. But if we just do propaganda, we limit the potential value of the artwork that we do. When we take on artwork, the creation of art, I think what we're doing is building impact around long-term basic questions. I think that art is too hard to make to sell empty calories. You know, we need to bite down and find ways to engage with people who are doing serious political work, serious economic analysis, serious education work, and bring our resources to the support of those efforts. A reason why those institutions prevail so much in our society now is because Disney has an open path in the classroom. And the teachers turn to that craft to try to educate it. Oh, I won't even think about going to see that little colored girl who's a princess now. Oh, Lord. You know. And people don't even know that Walt Disney was a fascist. He was. And he set out to support the fascist work. And people who go into, I'm sorry, I'll stop. You get the trend that I'm on. You know, I think.
McDuck and the Beagle Boy.
Huh?
Bruce McDuck and the Beagle Boy.
I think we have to bite down hard in trying to understand what really helps us make it better. And then if we can produce that, but there ain't going to be no big bucks come in to support your effort to make it better. So, yes, sir.
So
We
we'll
have
have
what,
this
about
be the
5
last
minutes?
question,
2
and then
minutes?
we'll wrap it.
We'll wrap up after.
Thank you, John. I do not know how you have navigated your way as somebody in theater, and because essentially your audience, when I was in music in Kenya and in drama in Kenya, when I come up with a piece that I want the country to listen to, many times I find that my audience are limited. Probably they are just teachers. And therefore, I feel that I'm not making an impact because I needed some minister, I needed some permanent secretary who is in high-ranking policy making to listen to this, so that then I feel some implementation can take place. So how do we navigate my problem? How do we, this audience that are just teachers, that are just helpless like me, that would not take action that is needed? How do I convince myself that I have a poem, I have poured it to the audience, people are clapping, that is really tapping into the state of affairs? How do I turn this to be, really something important that want to reach the policy makers, those who we want to hear? Secondly, many times the word social justice brings a lot of eyebrows. When we talk about justice, anytime the term justice brings a lot of eyebrows, whichever area it is spoken, people begin to question, now what next? Justice, now what next? And my understanding of justice is, it is always between the majority and the minority, the oppressed and the oppressor. How many times the oppressed or the minority feel helpless, that they are not making an impact, that their efforts are going to drain and nobody is recognizing, and they are suffering for no purpose. What encouragement do you have for this minority when the majority is against minority? That I am here, I am one person against 10. Will my voice be heard?
I would say that power comes from the bottom up. It does not fall from the top down. What comes from the top down is oppression and exploitation. What comes from the bottom up has the potential, if it stays true to its impulse, to its roots, there is where you have the chance to build some power. I was honored. One of my greatest honors is that Rap Brown wrote a book called Die Nigga Die. The first sentence in that book is a quotation of something that I wrote in the essay about the Free Southern Theater. That, and the sentence goes something, I don't remember precisely, but it goes, he who imitates, the slave who imitates the master confirms his own oppression. Affirms his own oppression. We cannot find liberation or justice by tailing behind. And I wish I could get that book to Barack Obama. So